Normally, I kind of plan these out ahead, but obviously today, not so much.
Makes sense. But yeah. So I guess a little bit of background. So Thor is actually the character that got me into comics when I was, I don't know, 15, 16 years old. And it was reading an old Stan Lee and Jack Kirby trade paperback that, like those Marvel Essentials, the really thick, 25 issue things that are all in black and white. And it was like Thor was one of these characters that, even though it's sort of interesting because you figure that somebody that powerful he's going to have the DC problem that he doesn't have any threats, but
right.
you can do a lot of different things with him, and the way that they incorporated these mythological ideas and these just basic sort of sand and sorcery adventure stories. It was pretty cool. And then not long after I started reading comics, they started the J. Michael Straczynski, Olivier Coipel Return of Thor series. I don't know if you remember that or not, but that was like a big deal when it happened, and I really liked that. And then a few years later, Matt Fraction took over writing Thor, and I really hated that one.
Oh yeah,
yeah, because
my actual introduction was Jason Aaron's run with Thor: God of Thunder.
Okay, yeah, Jason Aaron, when Thor: God of Thunder started, I actually really liked that with Gore and the Minotaur dude that came right after him. I really like
Aguilar or something like that.
Something like that, yeah. And then Original Sin happened, and by this point, I was kind of getting annoyed with comic books in general because, like, Marvel was just doing one dumb event after another. DC's New 52 was really stagnant and stale by that point, and Original Sin just seemed so, I don't know, dumb, so bloated, so pointless. I don't know if it actually is or not. I never actually bothered to read it, but just the promo for it and the lead up.
It was okay. It's obviously kind of forgettable for me because I read the entire series and I honestly don't remember who killed the Watcher.
It was Nick Fury, wasn't it?
Yeah, maybe it was. Obviously, I don't remember. It didn't leave that much of an actual impact.
Yeah, it just seemed like another pointless event to me. And then in the middle of the promo material for Original Sin, it gets revealed that there's going to be a new Thor named Thor, but it's a female. And between all the stupid things that Marvel was doing and all the dumb things that DC was doing, and then my favorite character, the character that got me into comics, being replaced by a female for no reason, when he's supposed to be the Norse embodiment of masculinity and virility, that was enough to get me to stop reading comics for the next 2-3 years. And if it weren't for diversity in comics, I probably still would not be reading comics right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting because that's quite an impact, actually, if you think about it. I wonder how many people he has impacted like that, for better or worse, that actually got them back into comics.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting to know. Because I just written off everything that Marvel and DC were doing, and then even though he pointed out a lot of stupid stuff they were doing, he was also pointing out good things they were doing. But.
Yeah. Well, there were things I started noticing that was happening in comics. I initially didn't pick up on it. It's like, okay, I saw that they're replacing Captain America with Falcon. I didn't have much of an issue with that. I didn't have much of an issue with the female Thor because I knew at some point they're just going to switch him back. And the same thing for Captain America. But what really kind of bothered me about it, and I think this is the thing that everybody brings up, and you brought it up too, is like the whole idea of that Thor is his name, and the treating of it as a mantle is what really bothers me about it. Because I really looked into the mythology. Well, I won't say I really looked deeply into it, but I did do some research into the whole thing with the mythology. And it's like, okay, was this just like a thing? I mean, were there other Thors? Because you had like the War Thor, and I was like, that just seemed really kind of dumb. And that's really where I got to the point was like, I'm writing off the whole Thor thing. I think at that point I really wasn't reading it anymore. It was just still on my pull list for some reason, and I have yet to cancel it. But yeah, it's like Thor was and I know you pointed this out in stuff I've seen where it's like female Thor is chastising real Thor about like not being for the people or whatnot, but that's like the antithesis of what Thor is.
Yeah.
Like Odin was worshipped by rulers. Everybody else worshipped Thor because he really was the god of the people. You know, farmers, warriors, whatnot. They were the people who worshipped Thor. He was, like you said, he's the embodiment of masculinity and all these things, which was very prominent within Viking culture. Yeah, and I think there was something that you brought up that I didn't necessarily think about, was like the whole idea, much like in the same way that Nick Spencer ruined Captain America, there has been a lot of harm that has been done to the Thor mythos. And go ahead and I guess explain that one, because I thought that was actually pretty interesting.
Yeah, so it's a matter of comparing the original Thor stories between, you know, not only what Stan Lee and Jack Kirby did, but what Roy Thomas and Walt Simonson, and even more recently of J. Michael Straczynski. You look at what all those guys did, and you look at what Jason Aaron's done. It's like Thor has never been really, the comic Thor has never been all that accurate to the mythos, but it's never been able to escape it either. You can't, right? Even like most of his villains are still derived from the mythology. There's a lot of ideas in his backstory that are very, very cleaned up versions of what happened in the mythology. So, you know, Thor is supposed to embody these sort of martial virtues, these courageous virtues, these heroic virtues. And he was designed to be two things. One, he was designed to be a guy who could beat the Hulk. That was the main impetus for it. But I mean, we all know Jack Kirby really likes this idea of gods living amongst mortals. Right. So that was what Thor was. It's what if a god became a human? And so you look at Asgard, how it was originally portrayed, and it was very classical in that sense. You had the patriarchal ruler figure, Odin, who he was very tough, but he was very fair. I mean, his concern was the order amongst the 9 realms. So if Thor was doing something that endangered that, yes, he would do things to Thor that, you know, any father would do to a disobedient son. He would punish him. And he was known to be a little bit aloof. He was known to be sometimes even cruel. But it's been common, especially since Matt Fraction started writing him, which was back when Siege was happening, that to portray Odin as just a huge jerk for no real reason, who is only interested in sort of his own power and his own, sphere of influence, rather than being the ruler who puts the order of the 9 realms above whatever he would want. So that's one of the big differences right there, is when it was Fear Itself, actually, which I don't think anybody remembers that. But in Fear Itself, that was where Odin basically sequestered himself in part of Asgard, some obscure part of Asgard, and this triumvirate of female goddesses took over as the All-Mother. So Asgard became Asgardia. So some of this destruction...
Really? Okay, that's where it started getting called Asgardia. That's interesting.
It's the same piece of real estate. It's just ruled by a female entity now, so it's Asgardia. And so I blame Jason Aaron for a lot of this, but a lot of it also predates him. This was back when, like I said, I think Matt Fraction and Ed Brubaker wrote Fear Itself. I'm not sure Jason Aaron was even at Marvel at the time. So that's it. The Odin thing is one of those things I've noticed in a lot of other comics too. This destruction of patriarchal authority figures. Even the Amazons got a little bit of it during the New 52, when the Amazons were revealed to be closer to their murderous mythological counterparts, rather than the sort of all good Amazons that DC's always had. So even female authority figures aren't immune to it. But and then there's so you get that, and that when you start to do that, when you start to take away the authority, you start to say that, well, the things that Thor was basically fighting for, that Thor was basically put on Earth to do, you start to degrade what his role is there. Because in the original Tales of Asgard series, they made it clear that the Mjolnir, the hammer, is just a tool.
Right.
It's just it's a very powerful weapon, and Odin placed an enchantment on it that whomever was worthy could wield it. And he obviously meant for Thor to wield it, but hypothetically, other people can wield it, like, you know, right. Beta Ray Bill being an obvious example.
Mm-hmm.
And but it's still Thor's birthright. And when Thor picked it up for the very first time, it was when he'd been training his entire life to try to be, you know, the good son. And he, you know, to be sort of this embodiment of all these Asgardian heroic virtues. And he was trying to pick the hammer up every single day, and he couldn't do it. And then one day, Hela kidnapped Sif, Thor's kind of girlfriend. And Thor, without even thinking about it, picked up the hammer, rode down to Hell to save Sif, and he offered to trade his life for hers. And Hela, even though she really wanted to get one over on Odin, she couldn't bring herself to give Thor a noble death, because that's what, you know, all the Asgardian gods really want. So she just let Sif go instead of doing anything. And it wasn't until years later that, or it wasn't until like a few days later that Thor realized what he'd done. So that gets into what makes you worthy to pick up the hammer. Because it seems to be it's up heretofore been portrayed as a static enchantment that you have to meet, you know, X, Y, and Z characteristics to do it. Mm-hmm. So almost everybody that's picked up the hammer, from Beta Ray Bill to Superman, they have like martial virtue and martial courage. You know, they know how to fight. They're willing to do violence to fight for what they believe in, but they only do it for good reasons. They're willing to sacrifice themselves. They're almost selflessly brave, and they've done all these things that show that they're ready to be the kind of person who could wield this power responsibly. But with Jane Foster, the way it's portrayed is that the hammer somehow is now sentient, and it knows who can best wield it, so it calls out to her. And Jane Foster, who's a 40-year-old cancer-stricken nurse, is somehow able to wield it, and apparently wield it better than Thor, the real Thor, was able to. And so that, to the point that she defeats the man god, the beast of a billion souls, and by just out-muscling him, essentially. So what it actually means to be Thor, and what it actually means to wield the hammer, and what it actually means to fight for the things that Thor has always fought for, have been completely inverted almost. It used to be that it was about, you know, being about something bigger than yourself, but with Jane Foster, it seems like it's this really kind of self-serving, almost kind of narcissistic way of looking at it, where the way that she's quote-unquote sacrificing herself is she's letting her cancer treatments run out every time she transforms, but it just seems so contrived. It's like, why would you ever change back?
No, I agree with that. But at the same time, I guess if the hammer gets too far, she doesn't have, you know, much of a choice about that. But yeah, there's a lot of things that really bothered me about how she died. And the first one, which I pointed out in my video, was if you go back to, and I think this is still within the Thor God of Thunder comic series, she basically says no to Thor about a magical cure. And I was like, said no cancer patient ever. I just thought that was really dumb. And I think that kind of plays into the whole point we were talking about, the whole thing with where she kind of represents the good part of atheism, or I won't say good part, the nicer atheist, more so, where Gore represented kind of this atheists that kind of hate everything.
Yeah.
Or the humanist. She represented, I think you said, the humanist version of atheism, where Gore represented the more kind of destructive, anti-religious aspects, which I thought was kind of interesting. I didn't pick up on that. I definitely did with Gore, and we were kind of talking about this previously before we jumped on. The way I saw what happened with Gore, the God Butcher, is that he essentially became the very thing he hated, which I thought was kind of the ultimate irony as him as a villain, because he basically, I think he does get elevated up to God status, and essentially, literally becoming the thing that he hated.
Yeah, the people that he quote unquote liberates start to worship him as a god after a while.
Yeah.
Well, the weird thing about female Thor, and I think this is entirely due to the fact that Jason Aaron is a good writer, unlike a lot of these other SJW writers, but female Thor is the only sort of replacement character that is consistently sold well, right? Or at least relatively well in the diminished state of modern Marvel comics.
Right.
It's like 40 to 50,000 every month consistently. It's not a great seller, but it's way better than a lot of other characters that they've tried to reach a bigger audience. And a lot bigger than even their supposed headline characters.
Right.
So when I did the videos, and especially the one on Thor 705 that became really popular, at least for my channel, as a consequence of it doing well, it also got a lot of detractors. And the detractors helped to shed some light on some of the things that I had sort of missed, which didn't actually increase my appreciation for Jane Foster as Thor, but it did make me see things in a more of a, I don't know, holistic light. And one of the things that I kept getting was that you can't, Jason Aaron's run, it is a complete run. It's like from the original Thor God of Thunder series to the female Thor miniseries to the ongoing Mighty Thor series, Original Sin in between that. It's all one thing. And so the one guy was pointing out that one of the people who was relatively respectful, he was saying that...
Relatively means he only called you a cuck once, right?
Something like that, yeah. But he was pointing out that basically the arc starts with Gore messing with Thor's head.
Right.
Because Gore was... he said, and it's been a while since I've read it, but my recollection is that he basically was saying all gods are unworthy, all gods are self-serving and evil, and even though Gore, like you said, he becomes the very thing he hated, Thor is still in the back of his mind, Thor is still thinking, oh gosh, what if he's right? And then Nick Fury, who has the omniscience of the Watcher, tells him that he was right. So somehow going against all of the established Thor mythos that I'm aware of, him basically feeling bad about himself because if Gore is right that all gods are unworthy, then he's a god, so he must be unworthy. So he just drops his hammer and can't pick it back up, which doesn't make any sense. But basically, it's the entire, I don't know, 5-6 years of Thor have been Thor going through this arc of realizing, at least I think the way that Jason Aaron did this, it's Thor initially realizing that the gods are failing in their stated mission, even him, who's arguably the best among gods. And then he sees this woman come along, because for like 2 or 3 years, nobody even knew who the female Thor actually even was. And then so he sees this woman come along who's able to do things with the hammer and the power of Thor that he was never able to do, which once again doesn't make any sense. But just in terms of within the story, he sees, Jane is able to do things that you're not really supposed to be able to do as with the power of Thor. And then she ends up ultimately sacrificing herself to save all of Asgard, who every single one of them hated her, especially Odin and even the All-Mother. So that's him. He realizes he needs to do better, sees somebody who can do better, sees somebody who sacrifices himself to for what they believe in, and then he has to basically rebuild his own life and his own sort of role from there. So I think that's the story that Jason Aaron is trying to tell.
And this is where I kind of disagree with you. And what made me think that he actually likes male Thor a lot more than female Thor was during the Generations comic, where he wrote Thor very well, or male Thor, not Jane Foster Thor, right. It was the great thing about it is that book didn't need to have Jane Foster in it. It would have been fine with just Thor Odinson. And he had much more personality and character, where Jane has like the personality of a wet paper towel. She is very boring. She always has the resting bitch face. And I get the whole idea of trying to make her own character. But the only thing that was interesting about Jane Foster as Thor was the fact that she had cancer. Other than that, she really had no defining character quality whatsoever. I do think that he did kind of build on top of what happened with Gore. But I don't think it was initially planned from the beginning. That's kind of my take on it.
Yeah,
I think he actually genuinely does not like female Thor, because if he did, I think he would have made her more interesting. But
yeah, and to be fair, like I said, I wasn't reading comics during most of this when it was happening, so I'm only kind of picking up on it the last couple of months of what actually happened with all this stuff. So it kind of, I don't really even know what she's done other than beat Mangog, who shouldn't have been able to be beaten. And early on in her career, she punched out the Absorbing Man, who you're not supposed to be able to punch out.
Yeah.
There was some like ongoing conflict with the Shi'ar or something that I don't know much about.
Know. I read the Thor miniseries, and it was okay. It wasn't anything really to write home about, but it wasn't super terrible. I think that was where she punched out the Absorbing Man. That was one thing I didn't realize. But there was the whole thing with the feminism being a whole, the 4-letter word thing. I was just like, this seems off. Why is this in here?
Yeah.
Why am I seeing these random things that like that? But anyway, I kind of blew it off. I didn't pay it very much mind. But yeah, so and then you get to the Mighty Thor, and I don't know. Like I said, I hung on to that book a lot longer than I should have. I don't remember what I actually read up to, but I just remember becoming very disinterested in the book.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, because I've read let's see, I really haven't read that many issues with her in it, realistically. I read Thor 700, which was the start of this arc. I read the Generations arc, or the Generations issue, and then the last 2 issues that they did, which was her actually dying and coming back to life. And I did notice what you're talking about, that even when, like in Thor 700, which is supposed to be a big deal, and it should be Jane Foster being, I don't know, cool, it's like the real Thor, his character arc is just a way more interesting, even though he's in a very diminished state compared to what he was just a few years ago. So I did notice what you're talking about. My theory, and I don't think I'll ever be able to prove this, but there's no way to disprove it either. So it's not a great theory. But in the Gore the original Thor God of Thunder series, he introduces this character named Roz Solomon.
Yes. And
I know she's still around. I don't know what she's doing. And my gut feeling is that he wanted her to be.
I agree with you on that. I initially thought that Roz was going to be Lady Thor.
And then I'm guessing it was probably Tom Brevoort who told him, I don't know if that really works with the history, but there was a time when a what if issue when Jane Foster was Thor. Like way back in the day. So there would be more precedent for Jane Foster being Thor. I don't really that's just my theory. So he was sort of maybe forced to make a character have the hammer that he didn't necessarily want, and he did the most that he could with it. Mm-hmm. So he just turned Jane Foster into basically whatever he wanted.
Right. And Edward Brewer, no, I wouldn't recommend reading 700 Thor, the Mighty Thor 700, unless you want disappointment.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, we're stepping on each other. Go ahead.
Well, that was the first comic I ever ripped in half on camera.
Really? Holy shit. I did a review on it as well. There was just a lot of stuff in there that was just kind of pointless. But whatever Thor was on the page, the real Thor, those panels were good, but everything else was just kind of trash.
Yeah. So she has a completely pointless fight with She-Hulk, who is...
Yeah. That's right. I forgot about that. That's all pointless. But yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, and I don't understand why Marvel has been doing this, but they've caused so much damage to their own intellectual property. It's really sad. And I think the Thor one kind of slipped under the cracks, but I think you're right. They did a lot of damage to the character. They did a lot of damage to the mythos. And Milo wants to leave my office. That's the cat that's meowing in the background. Okay. Give me a second here. Let me let him out real quick. Come on, Milo. Sorry about that. Tabitha's the only one who likes live streaming.
Well, she's the smart one then.
Yeah, she is. Okay, so Winter Exile says, I kind of enjoyed War Thor. He was a great idea for a character and looks closer to the mythological Thor. Yeah, you were actually correct on that. He does look a lot like the actual mythological Thor. But really annoyed me about the whole thing with War Thor. It goes back to the whole thing that we're all complaining about, like the whole idea that Thor is a mantle rather than a person's name. And that's ultimately what really bothered me about it. If I was Jason Aaron and I was writing all this and they wanted to make Jane Foster Thor, the way I would have approached it was, you know, she got the hammer, she turned into Thor, and it was Thor's personality that took over her body. That way... it's like the whole idea that, you know, he's possessing the receptacle. And since Jane Foster is female, his form is now female. And you could have done, I think, a lot with that. And how they could have taken the current Thor out of play was what Nick Fury whispered into his ear. You're not really Thor, you're a Skrull, and that's why you're not worthy. And that, yeah, and that actually came from one of the guys at my comic shop. He came up with the idea of why Thor would not be worthy. But the idea of Jane Foster is what I came up with. So I kind of merged the two. And it's like, that would have been really freaking cool if, like, that for the last couple of years, Thor has been running around and it's actually a Skrull thinking he's Thor.
Huh. Yeah, that would be cool.
But... yeah. But no, we got this instead. And it was kind of crappy.
Yeah. And I mean, part of it, I mean, Thor has never been a headline character. He's always been a solid, you know, low B-lister. He's always had his own book ever since the early 60s, but he's never been, and he has a dedicated fan base, but he's never been one that, like, has a lot of mainstream penetration, even with the movies coming out recently. So I mean, on the one hand, I can kind of see that they think, okay, we need to shake it up a little bit, but they do it in such a way that you can't, you do it in a way that it's not really the same character anymore. Right. It's like, if anybody can be Thor, then, like, hypothetically, anybody could take on the role of Thor, not just take on his power, but take on the role of Thor. And it just doesn't make any sense. And then there's other, like, little dumb things, like Volstagg, when he got that version of Mjolnir, it was literally Ultimate Thor's hammer, right? Right. And it's like, Ultimate Thor was a pacifist. So why would his hammer turn somebody into the War Thor? I don't get it. It's because, like, I only read a little bit of this in Thor 700, but it seemed like that whenever Volstagg turned into his version of Thor, that he was like overcome with battle lust. But Ultimate Thor never had that problem. Yeah. So it's I mean, it's not a huge deal because I think the Ultimate Universe is kaput now, but just little things like that. It's like, why did they change it? And the little things are representative of the larger changes usually in these cases. But
I don't know. I mean, that's a very good question. Because I did know that he had the Ultimate Hammer, but I didn't realize that it gave him, like, that the bloodlust or whatnot. I just thought, again, Mantle, you're doubling down. This is stupid.
Yeah, even if you're saying that you're taking on that somehow the Ultimate Thor's personality had been imprinted onto the hammer, that doesn't make it doesn't really explain why Volstagg was acting like it was some kind of drug that he was addicted to.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
and
a lot of these things they don't make sense, and they're just really kind of stupid.
and I don't know how much of this is just Jason Aaron trying to, or any of these modern day Marvel writers, they're just trying to leave some imprint on the character. You know, it's like Walt Simonson. Walt Simonson actually changed a lot about Thor when he took over as writer and artist back in the late 70s. It's like Thor no longer spoke like he was just a bad Shakespearean actor. His personality was a little bit different. The way that his powers worked were different. He got rid of Donald Blake entirely. So Walt Simonson actually changed quite a bit when he took over, to the point that if you were reading Thor and the Avengers story that was going on the same month, it was almost two completely different characters. But Walt Simonson's is considered a classic. So I don't know how much of that is just them pointlessly changing things to try to leave a mark on it, the same way that classic writers like Walt Simonson or Jim Starlin, or, you know, name big time writer X here, that
and that's the thing too, that I don't know, because from what I've heard from pros I've talked to that have worked at Marvel, for the most part, you don't have much creative control. Everything is really kind of dictated by editorial. So that's the reason why I don't necessarily blame Jason Aaron as much, is because I've heard about that. I've met Angel Medina. He used to work on Spider-Man several years ago, and we would just talk about comics and Spawn, and because I actually had one of his first comic books. It was really funny, and he's like, "Holy crap, where did you get that?" It was called Berserk, and it came out in the 90s. I was like, I don't know, I just picked it up, and I saw that you wrote it in your ear, so I brought here for you to sign it. I figured you appreciate that. So I mean, pretty much at the point we really hit it off, and he was, you know, every time he showed up at Alamo City Comic Con, I would go and talk to him and, you know, commission a piece and whatnot. And so, but he was telling me about how the reason why he left Spawn was to go, I don't remember if he was writing Spider-Man. I know he was drawing, but he mentioned that he was warned by Todd that you're not going to have any creative control whatsoever when you get to Marvel. And he was right, but he got to draw Spider-Man. That's what he wanted to do. But yeah, so that's the thing that makes me really kind of curious about this. Who's actually driving it? Was it Tom Brevoort and Axel Alonso? Was he just kind of following orders and just putting things in occasionally to meet the requirements, or was it all him? I don't know. That's my theory.
Yeah, that would be kind of funny if he tried to passive aggressively make female Thor as much of a wet blanket as possible, and still.
That's exactly what my thought process is around this. I think the reason why she is so freaking boring is because he didn't want to do it.
Yeah, that's a good possibility. The only thing that makes me think otherwise is that he took over Ghost Rider a few years ago as well, and that run that he did is almost universally reviled because he tried to turn Ghost Rider, both Johnny Blaze and Danny Ketch, into like avenging angels of the Lord or something. And they were talking about how they were spreading like holy fire and righteousness or something like that, and that change didn't stick, obviously, but for like a solid year or so, that's how Ghost Rider was portrayed.
That's weird. I didn't know about that. I remember the whole thing with the Punisher, you know, where he was like possessed by an angel. I mean, that I think I get it that, you know, they try to do different things because, you know, for the most part everything's been done, and they try and change things up and make things interesting, and I guess some things work and some things really don't.
I think that was also, well, that's not mine, but yeah, that could be it. I think when he took over Ghost Rider, it wasn't doing especially well anyway, so I guess they figured, well, it can't get worse, and that didn't really, but
yeah. McEnany, I agree with you. I think Brevoort and Axel Alonso had a lot to do with female Thor.
Yeah.
The thing that really kind of stood out to me, where I think things, I wouldn't say start changing, but it seemed like not soon after, but I don't know how long it takes to I wouldn't say put out changes or whatnot, because I'm sure at least it has to take like 3 months before something comes out.
I think it's 3 or 4 months.
Okay.
At least.
Because when you had the whole Milo Manera cover come out for Spider-Woman, that's where, and you had Marvel being attacked a lot during that time period. You had the whole thing with Captain America that was going on with Falcon and Jet Black. There was a whole controversy around that. There was the Milo Manera cover. There was the Batgirl cover that you never saw the light of day. That I was going to buy it just for the fucking cover, and that was the Joker doing the smile.
Yeah.
I think at that point is where comics was being attacked a lot. I don't want to say by feminism or social justice advocates. Maybe they were. But that's where shortly after that, I want to say like a year after that is where things really start changing.
Yeah, that I kind of remember. I think I wasn't reading comics at that time, but I do remember sort of all that stuff happening one right after the other. And yeah, it does seem like it got a lot worse as a result of that, that you literally weren't given freedom to do anything even that might be considered offensive, because they apparently want more female characters, but they don't want the female characters to be shown in any kind of danger or any kind of, distressful situation. It doesn't make any sense. But
okay, do you remember the whole controversy over X-Men Apocalypse when it came out?
That one of the posters showed Apocalypse doing a choke slam on Mystique or something.
Yeah, that would be the one.
Yeah, I kind of remember that.
Yeah, that's exactly what you're talking about. It was like the whole idea of women in peril or something like that. And a lot of people got pissed off about that. It's like, this is fucking stupid, people. She's a superhero, or, she's a super being fighting another super being. This isn't the patriarchy or misogyny. This is the good guys fighting the bad guys. Is he supposed to go, oh, I'm sorry, I can't hit you. You're a woman. Oh, wait, that's also sexist too.
Yeah.
What the fuck, people? What the fuck?
It's like Thor gets beat down by the Hulk in Thor Ragnarok. Is that somehow sexist against men? No, it's just...
Oh, no, it's perfect. It's perfectly fine.
Yeah. But if that happened to Valkyrie, oh shit. Instead, Valkyrie, I don't think she gets a hand laid on her the entire movie.
It's like, I'll be honest with you. I hate that movie. I really do. I do not like Thor Ragnarok. Mainly for a lot of the reasons being that all the tension gets undercut by humor. The stuff with Heimdall that was going on, I found to be way more dramatic and interesting than what was going on with Thor. Yeah. Yeah.
It's the way that Chris Hemsworth found mild success doing that improvised dialogue thing in Ghostbusters. It's like most people.
Is that what he did?
Yeah, if you look on IMDb, it's something like 80% of the dialogue is improvised. It's really stupid.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it was. I mean, the director, he has a weird New Zealand name, but he basically fostered this environment that we're going to shoot this like a comedy. So he encouraged people to be kind of silly and off the wall. And like a lot of people said that Chris Hemsworth in Ghostbusters is actually kind of funny. I haven't seen it, so I don't know. I can't imagine he is, but so I think that's what Chris Hemsworth really wants to do, and he was given the opportunity to do it, so he just acts like a moron for 95% of that movie.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the thing too. For Thor to be kind of an idiot is within his character, at least the mythology, because Thor is kind of an idiot, and I think that they do kind of capture that pretty well in certain aspects of it, but it's too over the top. There's a point where you have to let it be dramatic, and it seems like they were trying to Guardians of the Galaxy it up quite a bit.
Yeah.
And also, I couldn't stand Valkyrie. I didn't like her character. I didn't see the point of her character being in there. And like I said, overall, I just don't like the movie. The only thing I thought was pretty cool was the freaking fight scene between him and Thor, and that was it.
Yeah. Yeah, that part was cool, but everything else I could take it or leave it. But the only other thing that I kind of liked about the movie is that it's the first movie that definitively said that Thor is a god, and he is specifically the god of thunder. That it's something that's intrinsic to his character that can't be taken away, even if he loses Mjolnir.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's exactly the opposite of what the comics are currently saying.
Yeah. That's the thing I completely agree with you on. That Thor is the god of thunder, and you could have somebody come and usurp that, but it is his birthright. And it's like, if you look at D&D and whatnot, and like the whole thing with them, like people coming in usurping gods or becoming gods and whatnot, that would be pretty cool to have something in to do that. But the whole thing with how they pulled off, you know, Jane Foster's Thor was completely dumb. And there, like you said, there was no point. There is no good reason why she should have been given the hammer. And the thing that irritates me as well is the fact that apparently Heimdall knew, because he was the one who sent her to the moon. And that was the thing that really bothered me about the entire one, once they revealed it was Jane Foster, is how could this woman with cancer actually get to the moon to get the hammer? That made zero freaking sense to me. And it had always bothered me.
And then we find out that it was Heimdall, but why would Heimdall facilitate something like that? It did. Like I said in the comment, I'm assuming that it took place on the blue area of the moon.
Oh, it was, dude. I knew that. I threw that out there as a bit just to have a joke about saying Louis Armstrong to Neil Armstrong. So yeah, I mean, but yes, that does take place, I guess, on the blue side of the moon, where the Watcher was. That's the funny thing, because I completely forgotten about the whole thing with the Watcher too, because that's where Nick Fury told him he was not worthy.
Have you seen Infinity War?
I have.
Okay, I don't know if everybody in the chat has though, but
I don't think everybody has. Somebody said that they have not seen it yet.
It's almost the best Thor movie ever, and there's just a little bit of dialogue that I wish they hadn't had it, because they did the same improvised dialogue thing. But this is the first movie where he really seems the most like Thor, that even more so than in the first movie. But because that's the one thing, is they've never really accurately depicted his power level. It's like he's basically Superman power level. Not quite that crazy, but just shy of it.
It was pretty cool, and I'm not really spoiling anything for you guys, but there's this one part that really makes me laugh, is when he kept calling Rocket Rabbit. But that goes, like I said, with the character Thor being an idiot. Or just simply being just too arrogant to really give a shit or whatnot. It's pretty funny. But yeah.
But yeah, it's so funny, because it was when we went to the movie theater, it was late at night, but it was still crowded, and it was a very, very diverse group of people in that theater. It's like there are some left-wing advocates that like to ding the Marvel movies because they don't have queer representation, or they don't have feminist representation, or whatever. And it's like everybody goes to see these Marvel movies. And meanwhile, they make these comics that are supposed to have, are supposed to be so quote unquote inclusive and supposed to appeal to a bunch of people, but they don't. It's like, in Female Thor is the best example of, well, maybe it's one of the best examples of that. It's like, here's a character that's supposed to appeal to a lot of people. And even though in the diminished state of modern Marvel, it does, it seems like people are much more drawn to, in the movies anyway, the real Thor. This idea that he is, the god of thunder. He's this big, powerful, but still gregarious and kind of, friendly guy that is, if he's your friend, he's your best friend. And if he's your enemy, he's your worst enemy.
Yes. And yeah, I have to agree with you. The two characters that really steal that movie are Iron Man and Thor. And I agree with you. I think that is the best portrayal of Thor by Chris Hemsworth. Yeah. But yes, to avoid spoilers, Edward, because I saw that you said that you didn't see it. It is a good movie. You'll really like it. It's quite fun. And when I left, I was quite shell shocked, actually. But yeah, so you're right. I find the whole thing humorous. The thing that really annoys me about what's going on with comics is that they say that comics aren't diverse enough. It's like, well, comic books have. Oh, okay, you did see it. Okay, sorry, Edward. I thought you were the one that said no spoilers. Maybe I misread that. But yeah, it's always been diverse, and to say that Marvel Comics has a diversity problem, or comics in general has a diversity problem, I think is complete garbage. Look at Wonder Woman, for example, widely popular female character. What really bothers me about what's going on is that if you're trying to cram stuff in, and going back to what you're talking about, the whole thing with, oh, there's no LGBT representation in Infinity War. Where would they have room for that, and what would be the point? Just to check the diversity checklist, just to make somebody feel better about themselves? It's like for me saying Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, didn't have enough straight white people in it. That's fucking retarded.
Yeah.
It is what it is. You know, the movie is for what it is. You enjoy it for what it is. You don't need to have something in there just to represent the rainbow of everybody. You make a movie, you make it compelling, you make the character gay or straight, I don't care. Just make a good fucking book, movie, story, whatever.
Yeah, it's like left wing. There are some left wing and SJW type people that are trying to tout the successes of Wonder Woman the movie and Black Panther the movie as some kind of victory for, I don't know, their side or something. It's like, I've been reading comics with Wonder Woman and Black Panther in them for over a decade now. And some people have been reading them for like 40 or 50 years. I mean, the medium has been like that for a long time. There's
so much that irritated me about Black Panther. Well, the hype around it, not the movie itself.
Yeah, movie, I didn't think it was the best movie ever, but it was perfectly fine.
I thought it was one of the better MCU movies. I had a lot of problems with Black Panther. I thought he was the most boring character in the movie, which is kind of sad.
Yeah, that was my big problem too, is that it wasn't really meant to. It's like Black Panther had more impact on the plot of Civil War than he did his own movie.
Right. That sucks. But overall, the way it was being treated like it was the second coming. Oh, we got a first black superhero. And it's like, no, dude, this is not the first black superhero in a movie.
Yeah.
It's just, and the same thing with Wonder Woman. It's like, I've been wanting to see a Wonder Woman movie for a very long time, and I was ecstatic when they announced that they were going to do it. And it just, I mean, I love this with the TV series from the 70s, or was it 60s? I don't remember. It's like, I try to remember if I actually watched it in syndication or if it was actually not. But the one with Linda Carter, I loved Wonder Woman as a kid. I loved the TV show, and it is about time that she got her own movie. Now, okay, so I got a question for you. Have you heard about what they're planning on doing with, was it Phase 4 with Marvel?
I know a little bit. The impression I was getting was that they're phasing out all the characters that they've been using for the past, 10 years or so, and they're bringing in Tom Holland as Spider-Man and Alison Brie Larson as Captain Marvel and a couple other new ones, and they're basically building a whole new franchise on these newer actors, but I don't know the specifics beyond that.
Well, one thing that they're trying to do is I think I've heard something about how Phase 4 is going to be very female centric. And it's like, I have a bit of a problem with this, not for the reasons that people are thinking. It's like, why weren't they doing this beforehand? Because one of the things that bothered me is the fact that Black Widow didn't get her own movie. It's like, these are things that they could have done throughout the MCU over the last 10 years. They could have started introducing some more of the female superheroes that way, because at this point it just seems like it's an agenda. Okay, so we've had all these male superheroes, now we're going to focus on the females. It's like, why didn't you just do that to begin with? Yeah,
to be fair, there is a little bit of a mirroring of reality here. It's like, I believe Carol Danvers was the first female character to get her own title at Marvel, wasn't she?
Maybe.
Like, I don't think that. I think Ms. Marvel was the first ongoing female-centric title that they had.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, you know, they start off with relatively small stories, just like the early Silver Age did. Then the Avengers form, and then they come in with the second group of Avengers, Vision, Scarlet Witch. Then they start to go out into space and the wider universe more. So now it's like where the Marvel universe is right now. They're in like the early to mid 70s of the actual comic book time, and so Carol Danvers comes in the late 70s. There is a little bit of a mirroring of comic history there, but I don't know.
That's interesting. Like if they were doing that, I'm fine with that. I'm because it seems like we're so sensitive to what's going on. It's like everything just seems like, is that identity politics? Is it not? I don't know. Am I reading too deeply into this? You know, that's the thing that really kind of irritates me about all this stuff. Is like it could be purely innocent, but we see identity politics probably where there sometimes is not.
Yeah, it may just be that they're looking at the success of Wonder Woman and realizing that, okay, there is a market for this kind of story. But the problem is that Carol Danvers is the hardest sell of any movie they've had yet, including Ant-Man. It's like she doesn't have an especially interesting personality. She has the most boring power set imaginable. Mm-hmm. Her backstory is completely dependent on another character, Marvel. And it's super confusing. It's like the setting that her stories take place in, you know, the mid 90s, which is what they're doing in the next movie. That's not really all that interesting. So she is definitely, like, of all the character-centric movies they've done so far, she is the hardest one to sell you on. At least Ant-Man had kind of an interesting power set, even if it's, you know, a really weird offbeat thing. And Thor and Black Panther, they have this whole, like, universe that you can discover, you know, as you're going through it, whether it's Asgard or Wakanda. Captain America, he's, you know, the living legend, so you can just emphasize that element. But Captain Marvel, it's Carol Danvers. She doesn't have a whole lot going on for her, so that'll be an interesting thing to see if the Disney hype machine can overcome people's, you know, the inherent lack of interest that something like that is going to generate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I tried getting into reading Captain Marvel, and it's like, yeah, this is boring. It's like, why do people think that this book is so popular? It's really not. It's not good to read at all. And I think when it comes to interesting female characters from the Marvel universe, I guess the reason why they picked her is because Marvel's been trying to hype her now, and or maybe it's exactly like you said, they're going through the progression of how the characters were introduced throughout the 60s and 70s and whatnot. I would rather see a She-Hulk movie than Captain Marvel. It's like I'll go see it because I have a comic book channel. But if I didn't, I honestly would probably just wait until it's out on DVD or, you know, on, you know, out streaming or whatnot. That movie is like the only movie I'm not that excited for, mainly because I'm just not interested in Captain Marvel. I would rather see a She-Hulk movie.
Yeah, it's like they have a not terribly interesting character. The actress who plays her, Brie Larson, I've only seen her in a little bit, like a couple of movies, and she's kind of not interesting in those either. But there's still, I don't know. If they can make it work, then they could probably make anything work. But.
I guess. I personally would have liked to seen Catherine Winnick play Captain Marvel. She's the actress that plays Lagatha in Vikings.
Yeah, I think I remember reading about this a little bit.
Yeah.
Is that staticky thing that I was happening earlier coming back?
No, you sound fine. Am I sounding kind of staticky?
No, it's just something weird on my end, but that's okay. I basically what they wanted to avoid was that when they cast all the characters for the first Marvel movies, they kind of took who was right for the role at that time. But like Robert Downey Jr. was already in his early 40s when he was cast as Iron Man. Chris Evans was in his mid to late 30s. So Samuel L. Jackson's in his, 60s, is he in his 70s now? he's up there wherever he is.
I want to say he's in his 60s.
Yeah, he's definitely up there. So they tended to cast older, which when you're trying to do movies for more than a decade out is hard. So I think Catherine Winnick, I think she's in her mid to late 30s, whereas Brie Larson's only 28 or 29.
Yeah.
Tom Holland's another one they're hoping they can use for a long time, and he's only 18. So that was part of what went into that. It was just simply, okay, if we're going to put this person in 10 or 15 years worth of movies, they need to be able to we can only use so much CGI to make them look a certain age.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's the thing. I'm kind of fine with that. If the actor fits, then use them. I don't mind it being shorter, because honestly, I'd rather than just go and make a movie about that character than try and have like this, all this world building that they're trying to do, because that's only going to work for so long. And much like what you said, it's like just maybe do 2 or 3 movies with this person, and then call it good. Make Captain Marvel interesting. Make her a compelling character, rather than a dried out old mop. Because that's the way I kind of view her character. Something very, very uninteresting. And the funny thing with Marvel and the whole thing with the free digitals when you buy a book, they had Miss Marvel #1, because what they do is they use the digital platform to push a bunch of books that aren't popular, to try and, I guess, get people interested in it. And I read it, and it was just like so boring. It's like it wasn't even roast worthy. It's like I wanted to make fun of it, but I can't, because it's kind of sad.
Yeah, I don't think I think I even have the Miss Marvel trade paperback on Kindle, and I've just never read it, because what is there to like about her exactly? She has a dumb costume. She has a dumb power set. She has kind of a cipher of a personality. People say that she's this really awesome character that really connected with people, but I think it was only for kind of a short time that was true.
Well, there was years ago. It was the one where she's like pulling the glove on, and she kind of has that smirk. I mean, that she seems like more of an interesting character there, because she's got that smirk. She's pulling the glove on. She's this attractive superhero, and then they, with each reboot or each #1, they made her more and more mannish and less interesting, it seems like.
And then and I know reading Carol Danvers, it's a little bit it's like there's little things about her that annoy me, because I was in the military, and when you look at her career, because she was only supposed to be like somewhere between 28 and 30 when she met Mar-Vell and ended up getting superpowers. And if you look at her career before that, it's like she enlisted in the military at 18, and then she became an officer, and then she was an intelligence officer, and then she was a pilot, and then she was an astronaut, and then somehow she was working at security at a missile testing site, and that's where Mar-Vell showed up, and that's when she got powers. It's like enlisted to officer to specifically intelligence officer, pilot, and astronaut. That's like a 20-year career. That's not something you cram into like 10 years.
Right.
And it's like, it's the people that are writing it, they wanted to make her like super cool and super awesome, but they didn't know how to do it. So they just crammed in all this stuff that it's like the most ridiculously overqualified person in the military right now could maybe match that, but they've probably been in for like 35 years.
Right.
So it's just another level that it's like, oh, we're going to make her cool. It's like, that's Nick Fury was cool because he went from, being a combat NCO to going into the intelligence side as an officer. So that's like, it was written by people who were in the war, or at least knew people who were in the war. So they knew what a realistic, character who would be like that would be like. If you look at Carol Danvers, like that haircut that she has nowadays, and that she had when she first became Captain Marvel, which it changes a lot, but where she had that faux hawk, or where she has the sides of her head shaved, that haircut is not really popular with women in the military.
No.
And the only women that it's popular with are lesbians. So it's like,
well, lesbians are punk chicks.
yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing I think is interesting that you brought up, because I know this gets brought up quite a bit, is the whole idea of older comics were written by guys with a lot of life experience, be it war or whatever, where nowadays it's not so much. You know, there's these people that have lived very pampered lives and don't get the irony of the fact that they're basically really well off but consider themselves to be oppressed, but you know, stuff like that. I think the reason why these characters are it is because the people that are writing them are boring.
Yeah, they're trying to imagine what a cool person would look like, but it just makes them seem less believable as a result of it.
Sad state of comics.
Yeah. I keep hearing about how that not only are the movie and comics divisions completely separate, but that the two camps actively hate each other. And
really? That's interesting.
Yeah, I get the feeling that because that's one of the things that when we were sort of going after the female assistant editors, and some people were accusing them of being fake geek girls, and so the defenders of Marvel would say, well, you know, they work really long hours and they work, you know, get really shit pay for it. So how could you put up with something like that if you don't love comics? And well, one of the obvious answers to that is because that they thought they were going to get into the movie division. But it turns out there's like this wall of separation. So it seems, from what I understand, from what I've heard various people talk about, it seems like Marvel Comics is just kind of filled with all these people that really wanted to be on the movie side, and they couldn't get into it because once you're on the comic side, that's kind of where you're stuck at. So there's a lot of resentment. And I think Kevin Feige, NERDROTIC, was just talking about this last night on the stream, that apparently in the early days of the Marvel Studios movies, it was Ike Perlmutter, who's also in charge of the comics, that was in charge of Marvel Studios. And Kevin Feige basically went over his head to the Disney people and was like, look, you need to make this into a separate thing and put me in charge of it, because Ike Perlmutter is going to screw it over, just like he's done with the comics. And apparently the Disney people listened to him, and that's why the Marvel movies have been such a success, is because they basically let Kevin Feige control the pace of it, and then Ike Perlmutter and his cronies are just stuck fuming over on the comics side. That's the impression that I get of what the comics division right now and what it's been like for the past 8 or 9 years is like, just based on some of the things I kind of see on social media. And I remember that Umbrella guy doing a video about people that have worked there and what they had to say of it. And
well, one thing I thought was pretty interesting, because a while back when they canceled Fantastic Four, and I was telling a friend of mine about this, I was like, no, they canceled because of Fox. And he's like, no, that can't be the reason. It's like, yeah, dude, it is. I mean, it's, read these, articles that are talking about it. They, Ike Perlmutter canceled it because the fact that Fox had the rights and he didn't want to give them any more material. And it's like, that's pretty dumb.
Yeah, it's like, if anything, the movies help the comics, not the other way around. But
yeah. But yeah, and even then, the Fantastic Four movie was still a complete fucking disaster. But
yeah, it's like, why doesn't Fox just give them the rights back already? Jeez, they obviously don't know what to do with it.
Well, they're trying to get the rights back by purchasing Fox.
Yeah, I can't imagine that's going to go very well. If they actually do it, I don't know how to feel about Disney having control over basically all of the superhero movies.
Well, not just that. I'm worried about what they're going to do with aliens. And when is the Queen Alien going to be a Disney princess?
Whatever, the Kim Possible reboot has to deal with the aliens, and they just deal with it by kicking them or something.
Yeah.
Lol, these are so easy to beat. LOL.
As I continue to watch my childhood get destroyed. Do you watch Red Letter Media at all?
Yeah.
Did you see their the episode where they're talking about the whole thing with the Star Trek Discovery?
I'm not sure.
Oh, he has this great quote. It's like, so Jay, how does it feel to live long enough to watch all your childhood franchises get destroyed? He's like, it's great. It's funny. It's like he's so spot on with it. It's sad. Apparently McEnany's asking, are they rebooting Kim Possible?
Yeah, well, live action Kim Possible. I wasn't making that up.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, you know, that was after my time. I don't care. Anyway, I feel like we've run out of things to talk about.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So I think we're going to go ahead and wind things down, folks. Thanks for showing up on a Sunday. I know this is different. As somebody pointed in the comments, wow, a live stream that's not at 4 a.m.
Or when 5 other live streams are going on.
Yeah. I blame Unranked Chevron for that. He was the one who said that he wanted to do it during the day, and that's fine. I had nothing going on. So I guess this is the point where we go ahead and pimp our stuff. So go ahead, man.
Yep. So name again is Unranked Chevron. I've got a YouTube channel where I talk about mostly comics, and Twitter where I do the same thing. I was just on Englentine's Comic Book Thunderdome last night. So if you haven't watched that or that series, then that's a really good thing. But yeah, that's what I got.
So who won?
I did against Weaponized Nerd Rage.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I think he was a little bit off, to be quite frank, but
Probably.
he didn't quite seem he wasn't quite settled, it seemed like, but
He has a lot of stuff going on lately.
Yeah.
As always, Pope Size, whenever you show up, it seems like we're winding down, man. So you kind of missed everything. Sorry, dude. Let's see. As for myself, obviously on Comics Division, if you didn't know that already, because you're on my channel, I will actually be doing another review tonight, which is actually kind of cool that we did this earlier rather than later, because it gives me the opportunity to actually do a video, which apparently a lot of people have been getting on me for not doing lately, because I've been focusing on live streams. You can follow me on Twitter. Just look for Comics Division. I really don't say much. Occasionally I'll pop off with a snarky comment. Other than that, I don't tweet a whole lot. I got too much shit going on, I guess. If you're from the future, subscribe if you stumble on my channel, if hopefully you enjoy my videos and whatnot. If not, whatever. So yeah, that's all I got. So goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Have a good Sunday, and we'll talk to you later.